Hey friends, it's me, your girl Kristen Denise, also known as KD, here with day 24 of Black History Month. My location has changed. I took a little trip today. So my location changed because I took a trip today. But we're all good. Y'all almost didn't get the Black History fact today. I'm not gonna hold you, but I'm committed. I'm gonna do my due diligence. I'm sleepy though. But I'm here. Work with me, okay? Ignore the bags. We gonna make it rock, okay? We're gonna make it do what it do. So today I'm super excited because I'm actually not talking to you today about an individual person. I'm talking to you about an organization because collective power is important when we talk about Black history, in particular Black American history and the struggle for civil rights. And I think it's also important because collective power, collective strategy, collective resistance is, I think, going to just be necessary as we move forward in this particular time in history. So let's learn from some folks who started this way, who are in the movement this way. So I have mentioned quite a few times the organization called SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. There are a couple of leaders we've gotten out of there that I've discussed, like Diane Nash. John Lewis was a part of SNCC. SNCC was a very powerful and pivotal organization in the civil rights movement in the 60s. And so I think it's important that we learn more about them. So, to the notes. SNCC was, again, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and it was the student-led youth action powerhouse of the civil rights movement. It was one of the most radical and effective organizations in the civil rights movement. It was founded in 1960 as the youth-led organization, and they used direct action, grassroots organizing, and nonviolent resistance to fight for civil rights, particularly voting rights and desegregation. Unlike older civil rights organizations that have more of a top-down strategy, SNCC was bottom-up. It believed in empowering everyday Black people, in particular young people, people in the rural South, to take charge of their own liberation. SNCC played a key role in several aspects of the civil rights movement, desegregating public spaces through the use of sit-ins, the freedom rides, voter registration in the Deep South, the March on Washington, the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, and the Selma voting rights movement. So you're talking about they were in it, okay? These people did not shy away from violence. They just did not shy away from things that were challenging. They were truly in it to win it from the SNCC group. And SNCC was started as a nonviolent student group. By the 1960s, they had actually become a smidge more radical, rejecting nonviolence and embracing Black power and self-defense. And you'll understand why when you see who kind of the leadership kind of became during that time. SNCC's legacy lives on today in youth-led activism movements and the idea that true liberation comes from grassroots organizing, not just political speeches. So that is the legacy of SNCC. So SNCC was founded when students began to take the lead. It was born out of the sit-in movement that began in Greensboro, North Carolina, with the 4 young men who sat at the lunch counter. I want to say it was a Woolworth's lunch counter in February of 1960. And they refused to leave. Inspired by these student protests, one of the most legendary civil rights activists, Ella Baker, called a meeting at Shaw University in Raleigh, North Carolina in April of 1960. Over 300 students showed up from across the country and decided to form a new student-led civil rights organization. This new group, pronounced SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, will become one of the most influential organizations of the civil rights movement. It mattered because SNCC showed that young people didn't have to wait for permission to lead. They could organize and they could fight for justice themselves in a way that they saw as beneficial. Some of the key campaigns that they participated in. So you had the sit-in movement, which was about desegregating public spaces and took place mostly from 1960 to 1961. They helped to organize and expand sit-ins at segregated lunch counters throughout the South. They were nonviolent protests where Black students would sit at white-only counters, refusing to move despite harassment, arrest, and violence. If you're ever in Atlanta, the Civil Rights Museum in Atlanta has actually a lunch counter sit-in exhibit. It is challenging, but I do encourage you to do it. Their efforts forced many businesses to desegregate and prove that direct action could bring real change. SNCC's work pushed the civil rights movement into national consciousness by making student activism a powerful, powerful voice for justice. Not just voice, either a force for justice. So then you had the Freedom Rides, which was testing segregation laws in 1961. They took over the Freedom Ride campaign to help challenge segregation in interstate travel. This is where Black and white activists would often ride buses together through the South, sitting together in whites-only sections to test whether or not the federal government would enforce desegregation. Riders were beaten, riders were arrested, buses were firebombed, but they kept going and forced the federal government to step in and really enforce desegregation and interstate travel. The Freedom Ride showed that the movement wouldn't back down even in the face of extreme violence. Again, firebombed. They participated in voter registration in the Deep South, which was probably some of SNCC's most dangerous work. They did this from 1961 to 1965. They knew that political power was the key to Black liberation, so they focused on voter registration in some of the most dangerous places, to include Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia. The work was absolutely extremely dangerous. White supremacists responded with violence, with arrests, and even murder. SNCC's grassroots organizers lived in rural Black communities, also empowering everyday people to fight for their right to vote. SNCC's efforts definitely helped to pave the way for the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which helped to ban racist voter suppression laws, which are making a comeback. Something to think about. They were instrumental in the founding of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. Now, we heard about them when I talked about Fannie Lou Hamer a couple of days back. So they were also a part of the founding of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. It helped me to fight for true democracy. And this took place in 1964. Mississippi's original Democratic Party was all white, even though Black people made up 40% of the state of Mississippi at the time. And SNCC helped to create the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party to challenge the racist system. At the 1964 Democratic National Convention, SNCC leaders testified about racist violence and voter suppression in the South, demanding that the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party be recognized instead of the all-white delegation. Now, the Democratic Party absolutely refused to do that, but it exposed the hypocrisy of white liberals who claimed to support civil rights, but who wouldn't share power with Black people. And it helped to prove that Black people could organize politically and demand true representation. And they play a critical role in the Selma voting rights movement and the March to Montgomery, which took place in 1965. SNCC helped to organize the Selma to Montgomery March, which was a 54-mile march to demand voting rights. This is famously pictured like with Dr. King involved, everything. On March 7th, 1965, also known as Bloody Sunday, marchers were brutally attacked by police on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, which shocked the nation. If you know anything about John Lewis, who transitioned not too long ago, he was actually my congressional representative for a period of time in Atlanta. But if you know anything about John Lewis, you know that he was attacked brutally on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. There are a lot of very famous pictures of him from that day, from that attack, where they honestly thought he might die based on how badly he was attacked by police on the Edmund Pettus Bridge during the Selma to Montgomery March. And it was just a really critical moment because that violence, that news spread around the world, and it really pushed the government to act. It led the nation to it led to national outrage and the eventual passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. SNCC's work helped to force the federal government to protect Black voting rights. Now, they moved from nonviolence to Black power towards the end of their term from 1966 to the 1970s. They had grown frustrated with the nonviolent strategies and white liberals who didn't take real risks. So under their new leadership of Stokely Carmichael, he helped found the Black Panthers, who later became known as Kwame Ture. SNCC shifted toward Black power and self-defense. SNCC cut ties with white activists altogether, focusing instead on Black self-determination and racial pride. And by the early 1970s, SNCC had pretty much dissolved, but its impact was absolutely lasting, and it had created a new generation of radical Black leaders. They helped to lay the foundation for the Black Power movement and the modern Black activism. Some of the key leaders that came out of SNCC included Ella Baker, who's considered the mother of SNCC. She encouraged young people to lead their own movement instead of relying on established leaders like MLK. And she taught SNCC to focus on grassroots organizing and community empowerment because she believed that real leadership comes from empowering everyday people. You had Diane Nash, who we talked about a couple of days ago, who was definitely one of SNCC's main strategists. She helped to organize sit-ins, freedom rides, and voting rights campaigns. She refused to be intimidated by racial violence, and she helped to inspire young activists. Her lesson was women were just as crucial to the movement as men, as we already knew. You had John Lewis, like I said, come out of it, who helped to lead the March on Bloody Sunday and was nearly beaten to death. He later became a U.S. congressman, my congressman, and continued his fight for justice. And he told us often the fight for justice was lifelong. He was fighting for justice literally until the day he died. Then you had Stokely Carmichael, also known as Kwame Ture, who pushed SNCC towards black power and self-defense, coined the phrase black power, and shifted the movement towards self-determination. And he was like, liberation has to be on our own terms. So all in all, what can we still be learning from SNCC today? Young people absolutely can lead movements, and we shouldn't wait for older people to lead. I'm an older people now. But people younger than me need to be organizing and pushing and fighting for the rights that they believe we deserve as Black people, or for any movement. Voting rights are absolutely worth fighting for still, right now, today. And we need to be protecting voter rights and fighting against voter suppression right now. Grassroots organizing is absolutely critical to change. It starts at the local level, and so we need to make sure we're getting involved in our local community. SNCC was a radical youth-led wing of the civil rights movement, proving that young people absolutely have the power to change history. And as a result of their work, we got desegregated lunch counters. They faced down white mobs. They risked their lives for voting rights. They built political power from the ground up. And their legacy absolutely lives on in today's movements for racial and social justice. So Ella Baker is quoted as saying, "We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes," and we are still not resting because it's still not here. So in all of this, this is a little bit longer, but in all of this, remember, do what you need to do to be more than okay, because you deserve to be more than okay. Organize for what you feel is right in your community and join forces with other people, young and old, to bring about the change that you want to see. Don't stop a young person because they're young, and don't hinder the wisdom of an older person, because sometimes they done been through some things you ain't even thought about, and they bring insight and wisdom that you can't see. And all together, we need to absolutely do what we need to do to live a life we love, because we deserve to live a life we love, and that includes fighting for the rights to live that life peacefully, freely, without the hindrance of government, violence, racism, sexism, any of the isms. So with that being said, remember, I love you. I love you so much. Catch you on the next one.